a bishop was preaching on the evils of materialism, and he thundered, "You must never think you are in this world solely for the purpose of making money." This was good, newsworthy stuff, and the sermon was reported by the press. Unfortunately, someone added a full stop in a critical place, so that the bishop was reported to have said, "You must never think you are in this world solely for the purpose of making money." Question: where would you place the full stop? You must never think you're in this world solely for the purpose of making money. You must never think you are in this world solely for the purpose of making money. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have no money, I am only a windbag. Though I have the gift of intelligence and understand all the mysteries and have no money, I have nothing. Though I serve others and am a source of help to all and make no money, it profiteth me nothing. With money I can afford to be patient and kind. I have no need to be jealous or envious. Money gets its own way. Money bears all things, buys all things, boasts all things. Money never fails. Where there are good intentions, they shall fail. Where there is ambition, it shall fade away. Where there are good deeds, they shall cease, but money never fails. Now in this world abideth faith, hope, love, these three, but greater than these is money. Where would you place the full stop? You must never think you're in this world solely for the purpose of making money. You must never think you are in this world solely for the purpose of making money. Well, as we think, let's turn to God's book in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, beginning to read from verse 8. Ecclesiastes 5, beginning to read at verse 8. Let's stand, please, in honor of the reading of God's word. Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 8. If you see the poor oppressed in a district, and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things, for one official is eyed by a higher one, over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all, the king himself profits from the fields. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them? The sleep of a labourer is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owner, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when he has a son there is nothing left for him. Naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he comes, so he departs. He takes nothing from his labour that he can carry in his hand. This too is a grievous evil. As a man comes, so he departs, and what does he gain, since he toils for the wind? All his days he eats in darkness, with great frustration, affliction, and anger. Then I realized that it is good and proper for a man to eat and drink, and to find satisfaction in his toilsome labour under the sun during the few days of life God has given him. For this is his lot. Moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions, and enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot and be happy in his work, this is a gift of God. He seldom reflects on the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with gladness of heart. I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on men. God gives a man wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing his heart desires, but God does not enable him to enjoy them, and a stranger enjoys them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. A man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. It comes without meaning, it departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun nor knew anything, it has more rest than does that man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice over, but fails to enjoy his prosperity. Do not all go to the same place. All man's efforts are for his mouth, yet his appetite is never satisfied. What advantage has a wise man over a fool? What does a poor man gain by knowing how to conduct himself before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Whatever exists has already been named, and what man is has been known. No man can contend with one who is stronger than he. The more the words, the less the meaning, and how does that profit anyone? For who knows what is good for a man in life? During the few and meaningless days he passes through like a shadow. Who can tell him what will happen under the sun after he is gone? Amen. And you may be seated. Well, getting over it, and there is much for us to get over here in these verses we've just read. At the beginning of this section of Scripture we're looking at this evening, we notice and should remember that the preacher takes up a theme, an issue he's already touched on before at the beginning of chapter 4. Go back to Ecclesiastes 4, verse 1, please. Ecclesiastes 4 and 1. Again I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. Power was on the side of the oppressors, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. And here in verses 8 and 9 of chapter 5, he writes as he observes what we observe. If you see the poor oppressed in a district, and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things, for one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Now here's the point. Often, if not always, with power comes riches. And with those riches come an excess of rights, and indulgences, and perks, and privileges, often at the expense of those not in power. Hear that again, will you? Often, if not always, with power comes riches, and with those riches come an excess of rights and indulgences, and perks and privileges, often at the expense of those not in power. You may recall the original third verse from All Things Bright and Beautiful, which is no longer printed in church hymnals. The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and lowly, and ordered their estate. Such was used by the upper classes of the day, the ruling classes, to keep those beneath them in their place. And as a reaction against the class system, this verse came to be dropped. We no longer sing this verse. How accurately and perceptively it's been observed that too often the struggle for power brings suffering for the underdog. And time and again we have seen that within nations. South Africa, Rwanda, Bosnia, even here in Northern Ireland, and continuing in our present day, Syria, Ethiopia, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. Too often the struggle for power brings suffering for the underdog. In the home, how many children have suffered as they are caught up in the struggle for power between mum and dad, used as pawns, witnesses to domestic abuse, if not also participating victims, degraded as collateral in a custody battle of ownership between mum and dad. Too often the struggle for power brings suffering for the underdog. And then what about the civil wars in the church? Congregations split, pastors and ministries sabotaged, the witness for God dishonored, and the lost left lost. Too often the struggle for power brings suffering for the underdog. Often, if not always, with power comes riches, And with those riches come an excess of rights and indulgences and perks and privileges, often at the expense of those not in power. That's why Jesus says what he does in the likes of Matthew 19, 23 and 24. Do you have any idea how difficult it is for the rich to enter God's kingdom? Let me tell you, it's easier to gallop a camel through a needle's eye than for the rich to enter God's kingdom. Now, he's not saying only the rich, but especially the rich. Question, who are the rich? It's not just the Richard Bransons and Bill Gates of this world. When you consider the relative spread of wealth across the world, in comparison with most of the world, all of us here this evening are rich. I wonder if you would agree with that. In comparison with most of the world, all of us here are rich. Hear it. There are billions who do not have what you have. Billions who would love to have your lot. Who would love to live your life and have your job and survive on your income or go to your school or college or university. Millions who would love to just have one item of clothing and one pair of shoes and not the wardrobes and boxes we have stuffed full of them. There are millions who would consider the leftover food we throw away to be a life-saving meal for them. There are countless who can only dream of a house like yours. They don't have a roof over their heads, and if they do, it's made of cardboard or dirty scraps of rusting metal. When you get into your bed tonight, stop and think of those who have never had a bed. In comparison with most of the world, all of us here this evening are rich. How true, I quote it many times. I was complaining about my shoes until I saw a man with no feet. Do you have any idea how difficult it is for the rich to enter God's kingdom? Let me tell you, it's easier to gallop a camel through a needle's eye than for the rich to enter God's kingdom. In comparison with most of the world, all of us here this evening are rich. Too often the struggle for power brings suffering for the underdog. And perhaps the question facing us all this evening, at whose expense are we living? Too often the struggle for power brings suffering for the underdog. At whose expense are we living? Do you have any idea how difficult it is for the rich to enter God's kingdom? And how many would love to call Jesus bluff on that and say, well, how many would love to try and be amongst the exceptions to what he says? You see, he never said it's impossible for the rich to enter heaven, but it's difficult for the rich to enter heaven. And how many would say to Jesus, well, Jesus, let me try. Lay that difficulty on me, and I'll have a go. Do you remember Ted Hay from Fiddler on the Roof? Dear God, you made many, many poor people. I realize, of course, that it's no shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either. So what would it be so terrible if I had a small fortune? If I were a rich man, yubby-dibby-dibby-dibby-dibby-dum, all day long I'd biddy-biddy-bum if I were a wealthy man. I wouldn't have to work hard. Yahi-diddle-diddle-bubba-bubba-diddle-diddle-bum. If I were a bitty rich, idle-diddle-diddle-diddle man. Well, that's easy for him to say. I'd build a big tall house with rooms by the dozen right in the middle of the town. A fine tin roof with real wooden floors below. There would be one long staircase just going up and one even longer coming down and one more leading nowhere, just for show. I'd fill my yards with chicks and turkeys and geese and ducks for the town to see and hear. Each loud, cheep, squawk, honk, quack would land like a trumpet on the ear as if to say, here lives a wealthy man. I'd see my wife, my Goldie, looking like a rich man's wife with a proper double chin, supervising meals to her heart's delight. I see her putting on airs and strutting like a peacock. Oh, what a happy mood she's in, screaming at the servants day and night. The most important men in town would come to fawn on me If you please, reptevie, pardon me, reptevie, posing problems that would cross a rabbi's eyes. And it won't make one bit of difference if I answer right or wrong. When you're rich, you think you really know. If I were rich and had the time that I lacked to sit in the synagogue and pray, and maybe have a seat by the eastern wall, I discuss the holy books with the learned men several hours every day. That would be the sweetest thing of all. Lord, who made the lion and the lamb? You decreed I should be what I am. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? Getting over it. If I were a rich man. Well, let's think about that. First of all, if I were a rich man, I would be supplied, but never satisfied. Money does not buy you happiness. And if proof were needed, psychologist Oliver James revealed in a book that modern men and women are more depressed than in any previous generation. Rates of clinical depression are 10 times higher among people born since the Second World War than among those born before World War I, with women born after 1960 being most at risk. Modern life seems less and less able to meet our expectations. It makes us feel like losers, James says, even if we're winners. And Times columnist Simon Jenkins, he wrote this: a generation that is the most comfortable in history is also the most depressed. The new anguish of middle-class Britain and Europe and America is a realization that conventional success is worse than there being no road to happiness. It can so depress the serotonin levels in the brain as to be a direct path to misery. As James ranges from one case history to another, we are left with a bleak conclusion. The 1960s were right. The fragmenting of communities, the pressure of free market employment, the incentive to short-term material gratification have indeed led to loneliness and depression. The more we expect of prosperity, the less it seems able to deliver. It's not just a modern thing. It's been the case since way back, even in the days of the preacher. If I were a rich man, I would be supplied but never satisfied. You see, note the betrayal. The promise of wealth is that having it all is enough. The reality of wealth is that having it all is not enough. Verse 10. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This too is meaningless. Note the betrayal. After being fired by the Ford company, Lee Iacocca was forced to rethink his motives and answer some gut-level questions regarding his reasons for hanging on so tightly to his job at Ford. His confession of greed is not hidden, and let's face it, who can blame him? It is tough for anyone to turn his back on almost $1 million a year, plus perks. A fellow who has white-coated waiters available at the snap of his fingers and a chauffeur to drive him to and from work, he finds it difficult to walk away from that. In a moment of vulnerable honesty, Iacocca admitted that of the 7 deadly sins, greed is by far the worst. Listen to him as he quotes his Italian-born father. He says this: "My father always said, be careful about money. When you have 5,000, you'll want 10. When you have 10, you'll want 20. He was right. No matter what you have, it's never enough." And that's the betrayal. The promise of wealth is that having it all is enough. The reality of wealth is that having it all is not enough. Hear it. Money will buy you a bed, but not sleep. Books, but not brains. Food, but not appetite. Clothes, but not beauty. A house, but not a home. Medicine, but not health. Luxuries, but not culture. Amusement, but not happiness. A crucifix, but not a saviour. Religion, but not salvation. A good life, but not eternal life. A passport to everywhere, but heaven. The betrayal. And then would you note the burden? Verse 11. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owner except to feast his eyes on them? You see, what was thought to be a benefit turned out to be a burden. What a betrayal. What was thought to be a benefit turned out to be a burden. Matthew Henry commented, from what he had no doubt observed along with the preacher and ourselves, he said, the more meat, the more mouths. The more men have, the better the house they must keep. The more servants they must employ, the more guests they must entertain, and the more spongers they will have hanging on them. And in my observation, not my experience, but in my observation, I would imagine that last comment from Matthew Henry is the hardest of all, the heaviest burden. The more spongers they will have hanging on them. I can understand why some lottery winners want to keep their winning secret, not because they're greedy, but to protect themselves. The more spongers they will have hanging on them. When someone has money, they get all kinds of requests for their money. And all kinds of people start crawling out of the woodwork to claim some of that money and to cheat their way into getting some of that money. What a burden. The more spongers they will have hanging on them. Parasites, that's what they are. Living, feeding on you. Living, feeding off you because of what you have and what they can get from you. What a terrible thing to do, but how much worse to be the object of it. And to have to wonder if the people in your life are there because of you, with or without anything you may have or not have, or are they only there putting up with you, manipulating you, charming you, as they prime the pump of flattery and pretended loyalty because they don't want you, they want what you have. Now I often joke, and it is a joke, where there's a will, I want to be in it. But there are those for whom that is their creed. It is their mode and motive of operation. And how terrible and terrifying to be in that place where you don't know about the people in your life. Why are they here? What do they really want? Are they genuine friends for who I am, or just calculating parasites for what I have? And Jesus spoke about this in the parable he told about the prodigal son in Luke 15. Jesus said he squandered his wealth in wild living. Hear it, you do not live wild on your own. He squandered his wealth in wild living. You do not live wild on your own. There was plenty for him to spend his money with and on. And Jesus said, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself. He didn't hire the group. They were gone. When the money ran out, his friends ran out. He went and hired himself. What a burden of betrayal. And then note the balance. A hill shepherd's wife wrote a most interesting letter to a newspaper. Her children had been brought up in the loneliness of the hills. They were simple and unsophisticated. Then her husband got a position in a town, and the children were introduced to the town and the ways of the town. They changed very considerably, and they changed for the worst. Listen to the last paragraph of her letter. Which is preferable for a child's upbringing? A lack of worldliness, but with better manners and sincere and simple thoughts, or worldliness and its present-day habit of knowing the price of everything and the true value of nothing? Verse 12 of Ecclesiastes 5. The sleep of a laborer is sweet, whether he eats little or much. But the abundance of a rich man permits him no sleep. You see, having it all is not enough. Better to have enough than to have it all. Let me put it this way. When your yearning power is in accordance with your earning power. Note the balance. Your yearning power is in accordance with your earning power. Matthew Henry further wrote, those that labour for the world labour for the wind. For that which is more sound than substance, which is uncertain and always shifting its point, unsatisfying and often hurtful, which we cannot hold fast in it, and which, if we take up with it as our portion, will no more feed us than the wind. If I were a rich man, I would be supplied, but never satisfied. Here's the next thing. If I were a rich man, I would be secure, but never safe. Secure, but never safe. Question. At his birthday, or for his Christmas, what do you buy the man who has everything? What do you buy the man who has everything? An alarm. The shipping and railway magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt said, "The care of $200 million is enough to kill anyone. There is no pleasure in it." Secure, but never safe. And the preacher had seen it all before and before us under the sun, secure but never safe. And I wonder, is that why, as he says at the beginning of verse 17, all his days he eats in darkness? Is that because he's afraid? And so he's hiding himself? What is he trying to hide himself from? Who is he trying to hide from? All his days he eats in darkness, secure but never safe. D.L. Moody wrote, "Getting riches brings care, keeping them brings trouble, abusing them brings guilt, and losing them brings sorrow. It is a great mistake to make so much of riches as we do." Secure but never safe. Getting riches brings care, keeping them brings trouble, abusing them brings guilt, and losing them brings sorrow. And in verse 17, the preacher takes up 3 words to describe what Moody writes of: frustration, affliction, and anger. Verse 17, all his days he eats in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. Notice the frustration of insecurity. The frustration of insecurity. Verse 13, I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owner, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when he has a son, there is nothing left for him. The frustration of insecurity. He has no power over changing circumstances. How much wealth has been lost through misfortune of careless bankers, plundered pension funds, bogus expensive claims, insider dealing, the fixing of market rates, the fall of the stock market in a recession that has completely shaken the whole world. And it's not just punished the wrongdoers, but also the honest workers, the careful savers, the trusting employees working toward their retirement, and many have nothing left in the bank to give or pass on. I've seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owner, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when he has a son, there is nothing left for him. He has no power over changing circumstances. How frustrating, the frustration of insecurity, secure but never safe. And then note the affliction of insecurity. Verse 15. Naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he comes so he departs. He takes nothing from his labor that he can carry in his hand. The affliction of insecurity. You see, it's not just the poor who die young. It's not just the poor who are struck down by disease. For years, my brother-in-law worked in the motor trade. He worked closely with a well-known car dealer on the main line, rising to be his trusted right-hand man. In his later years, this king of the car trade suffered from terrible arthritis in his neck and back, and so he retired. But 3 years later, he came back into the car trade to start up another new car business. He asked Willie to help him, and it was during that time that this man said to Willie 2 things I will never forget. Willie asked him why he was wanting to go back into business, and the man said, "There's only so many times you can travel around the world before you get bored." You say, "Let me try that." I'll be bored. And then he said this, he says, "I'm in constant pain, and for all the money I have, I cannot get freedom." The affliction of insecurity. Riches are no barrier to suffering or sickness or sadness. Both the rich and the poor live under the same sun and will end their days under the same sun. Naked a man comes from his mother's womb, and as he comes, so he departs. He takes nothing from his labour that he can carry in his hand. The affliction of insecurity, and then the anger of insecurity. Verse 16. This too is a grievous evil. As a man comes, so he departs. And what does he gain, since he toils for the wind? The anger of insecurity. He toils for the wind. For all he has, he can lose it in an instant. Even through no fault of his own. For all he has worked and gained, he could be forced to let go of it all and leave it all at a moment's notice, even no notice, and nothing he has can guard against that. For all his security, is he really any safer? I think that's enough to make you paranoid and bitter and angry. For all his security, is he really any safer? This too is a grievous evil. As a man comes, so he departs. And what does he gain, since he toils for the wind? The anger of insecurity. If I were a rich man, I would be secure, but not safe. All his days, verse 17, he eats in darkness, with great frustration, affliction, and anger. Question. Because here's what it comes down to. How much of what we suppose to be in our hands is ultimately out of our hands? How much of what we claim to be in our hands is ultimately out of our hands? Secure, but not safe. If I were a rich man, I would be set up for life, but still set aside in death. There was a certain very rich banker. He was given a lavish funeral. Unfortunately, there was a misprint in the order of service, so that the wording of a line in one of the hymns, instead of being "Land me safe" on Canaan's side, was "Land my safe" on Canaan's side. And that is one thing that we can't do. We cannot take our money and possessions and stuff to heaven. If I were a rich man, I would be set up for life, but still set aside in death. Ecclesiastes 6 and verse 3. A man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. It comes without meaning, it departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than does that man. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice over but fails to enjoy his prosperity, do not all go to the same place. For all this man has on earth under the sun, he can no less enjoy it because of when and how and to whom he will leave it. When he leaves it, he doesn't know when that will be. How he leaves it. Through misfortune, there may not even be enough left over from what he now has to even give him a proper burial then. Those to whom he leaves it may be family parasites who care about their inheritance so much that he's quickly forgotten and they don't even spend anything for his proper burial. A man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial. How tormenting to consider and even participate in. So much that it saps the strength and joy and enjoyment of today, so fear-filled and dread-filled over when he leaves it and how he leaves it and to whom he leaves it. And the harshness and insensitivity of this is conveyed in the harshness and insensitivity of the illustration he uses. Verse 3 says, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. It comes without meaning, it departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than does that man. Even if he lives 1,000 years twice over but fails to enjoy his prosperity, do not all go to the same place. You see, the stillborn has no consciousness, no awareness. And in the same way, the rich, thinking of all they have to lose, they don't want to know. But they can't help themselves from seeking and looking to know when, how, to whom. Set up for life, but still set aside in death. In 1923, 9 of the richest men in America met at Chicago's Edgewater Beach Hotel. Their wealth and influence made them among the most powerful men in the nation. They were the president of the New York Stock Exchange, the most influential financier on Wall Street, the head of the world's biggest monopoly, the presidents of America's biggest steel corporation, electricity company, and gas company, a powerful wheat baron, the president of an international bank, and the secretary of the interior. Such men would have been the envy of America at the time. But just 25 years later, the picture was dramatically different. By 1948, one of the 9 was insane. 2 had been recently released from prison. 3 others were bankrupt, and the remaining 3 had all committed suicide. Set up for life, but for all that, still set aside in death. If I were a rich man, I would be served and sheltered, but still a slave and not spared. Think about that. I would be served and sheltered, but still a slave and not spared. No matter how much, still controlled by appetite. Verse 7 of chapter 6. All man's efforts are for his mouth, yet his appetite is never satisfied. In some ways, no better, no different than the beasts of the field. And we have seen, even in our own royal family, in the excesses of indulging self. I'm talking about those naked pictures of Prince Harry among the rich, just letting themselves go and indulging themselves, behaving with no decorum, with no dignity. They just let them go because they think who they are, behaving not like humans, but like animals, out of control. You see, no matter how much, still controlled by appetite. Driven by appetite. In other words, a slave. A slave. And no matter how much, still condemned along with the poor and the fool. Verse 8. What advantage has a wise man over a fool? What does a poor man gain by knowing how to conduct himself before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. You see, feeling things still, and needing things still, and asking things still, that money cannot provide. No matter how much he has, he still feels things, and he still asks things, and he still needs things. No matter how much, still condemned along with the poor and the fool. And no matter how much, still contending with our finiteness and God's almightiness. Verse 10. Whatever exists has already been named, and what man is has been known. No man can contend with one who is stronger than he. The more the words, the less the meaning. And how does that profit anyone? For all our talk, for all our stuff, we come to this same conclusion. Self is not the center. Self is not the limit. Self is not the best. There are forces and powers and authorities bigger and greater and higher than us all. No matter how much, still controlled, still condemned, still contending. If I were a rich man, I would be served and sheltered, but still a slave and not spared. Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, you decreed I should be what I am, but would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? Perhaps it would spoil us, destroy us. As we wrap this up for just now, I want to lay before you 3 conclusions. And please hear this. The preacher is not a pessimist. Neither is he a humanist. Neither is he a fatalist. The perspective of his observations are that of under the sun, and how limited and shallow and empty that alone is under the sun. He wants us to get over it. To get over it. And young people, with the whole of your life in front of you, imagining the big wage, the big house, the fancy cars, newest clothes, expensive holidays. Some have already spent their wages in their minds before they've earned them. And that's not just young people. Some older people are still striving after all these things, wanting to be the one that proves that it's not impossible, it's only difficult for the rich to enter the kingdom of God. Jesus, I'll try that difficult thing. Would you just listen to the preacher and the 3 conclusions he arrives at? Here's the first one. Contentment. Contentment. Verse 18 of chapter 5. Verse 18 of chapter 5. Then I realized that it is good and proper for a man to eat and drink and to find satisfaction in his toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given him. For this is his lot. Moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions and enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot and be happy in his work, this is a gift of God. He seldom reflects on the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with gladness of heart. I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on men. God gives a man wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing his heart desires, but God does not enable him to enjoy them, and a stranger enjoys them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. Here we have 2 men. One who enjoys his lot, and another who cannot. Spurgeon said this: it is not how much we have, but how much we enjoy that brings happiness. Get that? It is not how much we have, but how much we enjoy that brings happiness. Contentment. Here's the next thing, and that is concealment. Concealment. Verse 12 of Ecclesiastes 6. Verse 12. For who knows what is good for a man in life? During the few and meaningless days he passes through like a shadow. Who can tell him what will happen under the sun after he is gone? You see, not everything is under the sun. There are things beyond our knowing and doing above the sun. They are hidden from us because we are not God. And they remind us that we are not God. And that no matter how much stuff we have or how much stuff we don't, we will never be God. We will always need God. There are things beyond us, beyond our reach, beyond our buying. And without God, they will never be. Concealment, reminding us that we have a limit. And then here's the third thing, and that's commitment. If you want an overall lesson of Ecclesiastes as we reach this halfway point, this is it. Commitment. Commitment. As I said, the preacher of Ecclesiastes is not a pessimist, he's not a humanist, he is not a fatalist. The preacher mentions God some 40 times throughout Ecclesiastes. Commitment. Now listen closely. The rich man in his castle, the poor man at his gate, God made them high and low and ordered their estate. Now we know how power and position can be abused, but is that to say there is no place for it? All things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, the Lord God made them all. That doesn't mean that we must never challenge the status quo when what is and who is and how is are wrong. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive and stretch to improve our lot and make the best of it. Let me put it this way. Just be careful that God is in his rightful place and that you are in yours. If that means the castle, great. If that means the castle's gate, just as great. Be careful that God is in his rightful place and that you are in yours. Would you close your Bibles, please? Once upon a time, a stone cutter lived all alone. Though he had acquired great skills, he was very poor. He lived in a tiny bamboo hut and he wore tattered clothing. One day, as the stone cutter worked with his hammer and chisel upon a huge stone, he heard a crowd gathering along the streets. And by their shouts, he could tell that the king was coming to visit his humble village. Joining in the procession, the stone cutter gazed in awe as the king, dressed in marvelous silk, was greeted by his subjects. And he said, "Oh, how I wish I had the power and glory of the king. He has soldiers at his command. There is no one more powerful." Well, his cry was heard in the heavens, and immediately the humble stone cutter was transformed into a powerful king. He found himself riding on a great horse, waving at the crowds of people who had flocked to see him. This is power, he thought. As the summer progressed, however, the new king watched the effects of the heat upon his people. Men and animals became weary, and plants withered under the powerful rays of the sun. And as he looked at the sky, the new king realized that the sun was more powerful than any earthly ruler. How I wish I was as powerful as that, he thought. I wish I were the sun. Immediately, his wish was granted. The stone cutter relished his new role as the sun. He gloried in the power he felt as he surveyed the kingdoms below. As he sent his bright rays to earth, he watched kings and princes hide under their parasols. He watched as powerful warriors became weak under his gaze. Even the crops in the field were under his command. Then one day a tiny cloud moved over the land, shielding the earth from the sun's bright rays. Seeing that there was something more powerful, he thought, I want very much to be a cloud. Again, his wish was granted. Now he blocked the sun's rays and felt important. He gathered all his strength, becoming a gigantic cloud, and began to pour down rain on the earth. Rivers formed where previously there were none, and waters flooded the streets of the cities and the farmland. Everything, trees, animals, people, seemed to be awed by his power. Only the massive rocks were unswayed. And again he felt something was more powerful. There is nothing, he thought, as powerful as a rock. How I wish I were a huge stone. His wish was granted. As a stone, he remained motionless and powerful, unmoved by the sun or wind or rain. He felt exempt from all the forces that shaped the existence of those around him. Then one day a man approached carrying a bag. When he stopped, he pulled out a chisel and a hammer and began to chip away at the rock. Realizing that the man with the tools was more powerful than any rock, he cried out, "Oh, I want to be a stone cutter." Once again the heavens heard his cry, and he became a stone cutter. Once again he lived in a bamboo hut and made his living with hammer and chisel. And he was content. If I were. If I were. For who knows what is good for a man in life during the few and meaningless days he passes through like a shadow? Who can tell him